people should not come to play on Shabbat to poke at the fire, raise the fire in any way, because that would be a violation of Shabbat. So the rabbis we spoke about the idea if you're lighting wood for fuel or for whatever purposes, for heat, before Shabbat, we spoke about the fact that you have to go, the Mishnah says majority, and the Gemara discussed, does it mean the rove? Does rove mean the majority of the wood? Does it mean the majority of each and every piece of wood? Does it have to be lit? Or does it mean something else? The Gemara has a whole discussion exactly how much of the wood needs to be ignited before Shabbat, so you'll be confident you won't have to play with it might come to forget and play with it on Shabbat. So now the Gemara is saying that there's a difference between wood and reeds. That's where Rav Huna wants to make a difference. Rav Huna, right? That's what we're up to on 20A4. Rav Huna, right? On the bottom, right, David? Kanim ain't tzrichin rov. We do not require majority when it comes to kanim, when it comes to the reeds, right? Again, we said by wood, one opinion says you have to have a majority of each and every one has to be lit, and the other opinion says you don't need a majority of each and every one. Rather, a lot has to be lit enough that people will not say we have to bring additional wood to help the fire. So even if you don't have, according to that second opinion, even if you don't have majority of each and every one, but as long as enough is on fire that people will not need to go ahead and bring additional, people also we need additional twigs, you're good. So here comes Rav Huna and he says, good morning, Simon, that reeds do not require majority because they keep on going, they remain on fire, and therefore you don't have to worry that the fire is going to get less and it's not going to hold very well. And therefore, you're good when it comes to reeds. Just gotta get the reeds on fire. Just light it. You want to light it a couple of minutes before Shabbat, you're good. Okay, so that would be a very practical thing. A guy comes before Shabbat, and he realizes he needs to get some fuel going, some heat. He needs some. It got very cold. If it's gonna take regular wood, it's not gonna have enough time to catch enough of it. So the Gemara says he has an option. He has an option, according to this opinion, is he could just light up some reeds, long reeds. They keep on going. But if you tie the reeds together, tzrichin rov, then you need the majority of those reeds to take on fire, because the flame, because it's tied together, does not have space. You didn't give it space to enter. You didn't give it room because you tied the reeds together. And there's a concern, maybe you might come to play with that fire on Shabbat. Now, garinim, dried pits of dates that were used as fuel. So it's very dry. It's like a piece of wood, and you would light it up. So also a tzrichin rov, you do not need to have the majority of that pit lit before Shabbat. Rather, as long as once you get it started, it's good to go. It's going to keep on going. Nosana b'chasolot, if you put the pits into baskets, let's say palm baskets, and then you went ahead and you lit that basket, which has the pits are gathered together in that basket. Now, tzrichim rov. You need majority because they're together. Because since they're in this basket, they're together, and there's not enough space for the flames to go through in order for it to really catch very well. And therefore, there's a concern that you might come to play with it on the Shabbat. Maskif lo Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda challenged Rav Huna's opinion. He says, Adarabba, on the contrary, the logic should be the opposite. Kanim, when you have reeds, like these long reeds, and they're not tied together, and they're loose, mivadran. So maybe when you light one on fire, you know, it could, they separate from each other. If you have, let's say you have reeds, you have a pile of reeds, but they're not tied together, so they're loose. So when you light one, it might not necessarily catch it. The other one might separate from it. It might not actually light the other one because they're not tied together. So therefore, you should be more concerned when they're loose rather than when they are tied together. So and agdam, but if you tie them together, loma vadram, they're not scattered. If you tie together, they're very close to each other. So when one, good morning, Asaf. So when one gets on fire, the other one should hopefully continue. That one should ignite the other one. Same thing with garinim, with the pits. If you have the pits that they're not tied together, then mivadram, they separate from each other. You light one, doesn't it's not necessarily that that the other one will catch, and therefore you should be concerned that, and therefore there should be a problem. Maybe you might come to uh, move it around and come to violate the Shabbat. However, not if you put it in chatolot, good morning, Ronnie. If you put it in a basket and you light the basket, you light the palm tree, that basket, let's say it's made out of palms, and you have the pits in there and they gather together, so therefore they will light each other. Each one will light the other one up. Lo mevadram. They don't scatter, and therefore there should not be a problem. So the Gemara here has a disagreement between the two rabbis in whether it's better for something something to be tied together, for the reeds to be tied together. Would that make it that it's going to last longer and there'd be less need for intervention for a person? Or is it better for it to be loose and have a little more space for would you say more space for the flame to come in? Because, sorry, if it's loose, well, yes, there's more space because it's not tied together. You have room for the flame. Or do you say it's tied together, it's better because one is close enough to the other one that will help ignite the other one? So that is the question of the Gemara. So itma, and some remove the word nami. Itma, so now the Gemara has a conclusion. Amar Rav Kahana. Now we're turning the page on Chafam base 20b. 20b1. He says the following. He says, Kanim she'agdam. He takes the position, he agrees with the first opinion, not the second opinion of the Gemara. When you tie the reeds together, the tying of the reeds together make it more difficult for the flame to go in because you have tied them together. It needs extra strength for the flame to go in, and therefore you might come to intervene and move the wood around and help the wood come on fire, and that will be a problem. And therefore we say shichim rov. You would require the majority. However, lo agdan, but if you did not tie them together, then ain't strichen rov. Then you do not need the majority. Because if you did not tie it together, so then we're going to say there's more room for the flame to go in. Maybe we'll take out the Shulchan Aruch. 1 second. These laws, this Gemara is brought down in Shulchan Aruch in Siman Reish Nun Hey, Sif Gimel. He says, Madura, if you have a pile of reeds and pits, date pits, when they're scattered, As long as the fire began, you lit it right before Shabbat, you're good. But if they're tied up together, the Shulchan Aruch says if they're tied up together and if the pits are in a basket, which is similar to being tied up together, you need to make sure that it's lit enough that the flame will go up by itself. And we don't just say that just light it a little bit. But how does our Gemara say? What is our Gemara saying? Or the text of our Gemara? Text of our Gemara makes a difference and it says the following again. Amar of Kahana. Kanim she'agdam. If you have the top of the page, the reeds that you tie together, because you tied the reeds together, it's hard for the flame to get in between each reed. Therefore, there's more concern that you might intervene to help them with the wood, and therefore that'll be a problem on Shabbat because you're not allowed to make a fire on Shabbat. So you need the majority of you need a lot of it has to be, and you need majority. We translating majority could be enough. A lot of it is on fire that nobody's going to say let's bring some extra twigs. Lo agdan, if you did not tie them up, then ain't shlicha rov, because you didn't tie it up. There's enough room for the flame to go in between the reeds. Correct, David? Now, Garinin, this opinion here has that Garinin, but the pits, we make a difference between the pits and the reeds. But the pits, we're going to say, srichen rov. If they're loose, we have to have that rov, a lot of them on fire. But if it's nasan b'chatolot, but if we put them in a basket, so then by the pits, the basket will ein srichen rov. The basket, even though they're more united in the basket, they're more together, but they're much more flammable material, these pits. So once you get them on fire, you don't have to worry if they're in a basket, if they're together. Tana Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef now says there are four medurot, there are four different types of materials that ain't svichim rov. That these materials are so flammable that you don't have to, you don't need rov. Now, the way the Shulchan Aruch says the following: if you cannot make the Shulchan Aruch says the halachan b'chaver, you cannot make a fire. You want to make like a bonfire. You want to put wood together before Shabbat, unless you lit it up in a way that the flame goes out without any help of any other wood. So you're not going to need. You're not going to need to say, let's bring some other, let's bring some other twigs. You lit it up, but if there's a concern that you might still say we need some extra twigs to help the fire, that means it's not enough. It hasn't been lit enough, and if you do that, if you violate the law, the Shulchan Aruch says, if you made such a fire without it reaching this level that people will not ask for additional help of wood, you're not allowed to benefit from that fire. You can't use it on Shabbat. Okay, and once you lit it, the Shulchan Aruch says with enough that you could that it would be on fire enough that you're not going to ask for. We need extra twigs. Then you could warm yourself, use it as light. Then it'll be fine. So now the Gemara is now saying that I have some other materials that just get it started. Just start. If this material is used, this fuel is used, you have nothing to worry about. Arba medurot. There are four medurot. Ain't srichin rov. You don't need majority. Shel zefet. If you have wood that's soaked in pitch, so wood that's soaked in pitch, or you have a tsim, or you have, let's take a look at this. We're now on 20B1, right? So if it's soaked in the pitch, So that pitch is very flammable. Or if it's wood that's in shale gafrit and sulfur. If it's in the sulfur, if the wood is covered with sulfur or shalgvina, some some have it that it's not gvina, not cheese, but gvina have it as like a wax. They have a different text, kira, or shel revav, or it's a fatty substance. If it is, they call it grease, or if it's animal fats, if it's in this material, if it's covered with this material, then it's going to remain on fire. You don't have to worry about these fuels. They're very flammable and they keep on going. The matnita tana in the Braita we learned, af shel kash shel gavava. Let's say if you have straw, or you have if the fuel is fueled by straw, the fire or stubble, that's very flammable material, and that's going to keep on. Just as long as you started that fire before Shabbat, you're good. You don't have to worry about that. You're going to come to. If it didn't reach it, if you did not do your due diligence, meaning you weren't early enough, it didn't reach the level that the fire is really running good, right? You can light a fire, right? You make a barn fire, right? There's a certain time that okay, we're good. The fire is good. There's a certain time, so then you could use it. You could use it for light. You can use it for heat. You can't actually put food to cook on Shabbat on there, but you could use it for what you want. You want a heating purposes, for light, to heating purposes. But if that fire did not reach a point that you really are confident that you don't need any additional help with the fire, that means you can't use that fire on Shabbat. Can't use it. So that you can't use it. So that's our Gemara's discussion here. There's certain materials that a person might use that is so flammable that you don't have to worry about. It's good. Just once you get it on stuff to get the fire going, you're good. But the average wood is not that way. The average wood many times needs help. Could go out. You got to get. You know what? Think about everybody. Think about the burning of chametz. Think about the pail. I don't know. Now my town, they take a pail. They have wood, but a lot of times they got to add. They got to add something. They got to add some. The fuel to that fire. They got to throw in another piece of wood. That means if they got to throw in another piece of wood, that means that fire would not be a good fire for Shabbat. I mean, if you could, the way they make, right, Simon, you know what I'm talking about, right?
How long would it last? Last for 2-3 hours.
Right. 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 But so as long as maybe the point would be, as long as I'm at a point that I'm not going to need to add, I could use it. But if most probably, Simon, you're right. If on Shabbat, let's say before Shabbat, the fire reached the point I don't need extra wood. But then at a certain point, it's going to need it. So maybe at that point, I would say I can't be using that fire, because the same way on Shabbat we're afraid that you might come to some stoke the coals. So if I'm going to use a fire which is at a point that it might require extra wood, I might come to do that. So that's actually, we have to look into that. But that would make sense to me. But again, think about that fire. The fire that they use to burn the chametz is not the fire in the garbage can. That's not a good enough fire for before Shabbat, because it's short term. It doesn't last, that fire, right? Meaning you always need to add to that fire. Now, do you ever see when they make a nice bonfire and the wood is on fire? You got the wood. It's just relax and you sing songs, right? And they call it a kumsitz, right? You sing songs at the fire. That's the fire that the Gemara is talking about. That's the good fire before Shabbat. If you made that fire, that pile of wood, it's a nice pile of wood, and you don't need it. We don't have to call in any. We don't need any. We don't have to worry. You don't have to think about adding anything to the fire. That's the fire that if you put on before Shabbat, that you don't have to. You're good, right? Right. Simon is saying no fires list.
You gotta move the wood, you have big blocks of wood, you gotta push the burn, you gotta push the.
Right. But if you have a certain amount and if a certain amount if it's on fire, a certain level, then you could be your hands off, right? You have that. There is a certain amount of time that if you put the wood together properly and you lit it properly, that you could, right? I mean, I presume Adam looks like a guy that spent time in in the forest with log cabins. Right? Am I right? He looks like that type of guy, right? He looks like an adventurous. Am I right? I got the right read. So tell us about those fires those warm fires at night. That the people were singing nice songs, right? Tell us about those fires, right? There's a certain point that the fire is good. You get your hands off, right? You don't have to. You're not involved. Am I correct? There are certain fires that you're always involved. That's not the fire that the Gemara is talking about. See what I'm saying? Is it clear, Adam, what we're saying over here? And now comes Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Eitzim shel Bavel." He says the wood in Bavel ain't tzrichin rov. The wood in Bavel does not need the majority. That means that wood in Babylon was very flammable wood. You just light it a little bit, Mr. Haber, it keeps on going. So the Gemara questions him. Well, Maskivla and Rabbi Yosef, Mahi, what is this wood of Bavel? What's unique about the trees of Bavel? What, it just means the regular wood of Bavel. The regular wood of Bavel should be like any wood. That, it's not enough just to get the little bit of the wood on fire, right, Simon? You got to get a lot of the wood on fire. So Rabbi Yosef says, if you're going to tell me it's a small, thin pieces of wood that they used to light in Bavel, they would cut the wood into very thin pieces of wood. It's like a certain size of a twig of some sort. And that, if you light that, then you're good. And you don't have to worry about that it's going to go off. It's going to need additional attention, intervention. You're good. Your hands off. And therefore, if your hands are off, that's what we want. We want hands off, right? On Shabbat, we want hands off the wood, the materials. So the Gemara says, Hashta petilah. If you have a wick that's dipped in oil, and it's easy for a wick that's dipped in oil, Mr. Haber, to burn, nevertheless, Oma Ula said, Hamadlik, if you light a lantern, oil with a wick before Shabbat, how much of the wick has to take hold of, how much of the fire has to take hold of the wick, according to Ula, in order to say that that's a fine fire that could be left on for Shabbat, for you want to light, you want for lighting purposes, is he needs sarach sheyadlik berov hayotze, that the majority of the wick that goes out, that's outside the oil, you have to have the majority of that wick on fire. If less than a majority of the wick is on fire, we're concerned that you might come to play with that wick. If a wick caught, majority of the wick is on fire, so you're good. You think about Hanukkah, right? If you use if the wick, if only a little bit of the wick is on fire, what could happen? That wick the fire might go out. There's something might play with it. But if the majority of the wick is on fire, you are good. But if you require a majority of the wick, which when the wick is saturated with oil, it's stuck in oil, which is very flammable, still you require a majority. So hayotze, so siltei mibayeh. So these little pieces of wood certainly are not as flammable as a wick in oil. So how could you just say that these little pieces of wood, so it can't be that we're referring to these little pieces of wood in Bavel in Babylon, because these little pieces of wood in Babylon are not as flammable as the wick. And if the wick, we require the majority of the wick, so we should require the majority of the this wood to be on fire. Elam Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, Socha the Arzat. When it says the wood of Bavel, you know what we're referring to? The wood of Bavel? We're referring to the branch, the cedar branch that's in Babylon, that's dry and thin, and it has like a woolen type of material that grows between the bark and the wood. So what do you have? You have the wood itself, right? You cut off the bark, the outside, the shell, but there's a material that's between the there's a little clothy, woolish material between the wood itself and the bark, and the shell on the outside. And that little wool material, it's like a cloth material that grows over there, that material keeps the wood burning. Once the fire gets hold of it, it keeps it going. And therefore, that's what he's referring to when he says the wood of Bavel. He only meant the branch of the cedar tree, which is commonly found in Bavel, which has this unique clothy material, some type of material that grows between the wood and the bark, and therefore that is a very flammable. So once you get that started, it keeps on going. And Rabbi Abba moss. He says it's referring to the zaza. The zaza is moss. It's another type of material that is very flammable. And this is a type of material that grows around the tree, and therefore, because this is very flammable, this moss is what we're referring to. That once it gets on fire, you could continue. You don't have to have them so much on fire. Just it starts, and this moss keeps on going. Okay, now we're making a move, right? Life is about making moves, the right moves, right? Right, Adam? We're on now. As you know, we had started. We had when I was away traveling. We had somebody, Rabbi Canarik, started the second parak. So now I think that you're up to the second parak. I'll double check with him, but I think he said up to 21a. So let's give a little introduction to the second parak before we start. The Mishnah in the second parak, if you look at 20b, right where we left off, go back to where you left off, a very famous Mishnah that you say Friday night, right? You say Bamer Madlikin, right? Bamoy Madlikin. The Mishnah discusses, and this is exactly very well connected with the Gemara that we've been learning. You know, on Shabbat, we've been talking a lot now recently about the wood, the fuel for warming materials, regarding certain fuels, the wood, you want to light up wood, how much of the wood has to be lit? And now also we've been talking about different woods, different types of certain materials are more flammable, and what makes them more flammable. Now the Mishnah is going to be more specific about wicks and oil or other types of fuels. Which wicks are good wicks? Which wicks are very healthy to use, that you don't have to be afraid that you're going to have to go ahead and intervene to help with that fire, that the fire might not catch so well, might not do so well. And also the Mishnah is going to talks about which types of fuels. What type of fuels can you use on Shabbat? Which fuels are fuels that that the wick catches to very well, right? If you go ahead and you take plain pitch and you want to use pitch as an oil with a wick, so the Mishnah says that's not good because plain pitch being used. Before we spoke about the wood being soaked in the pitch, covered by pitch. But if it's just pitch and the wood is the real fuel, but if you have pitch and you put a wick into pitch, that's not going to take so well. And the Mishnah said you can't use that type of material. And the Mishnah mentions other types of wicks. If that's what the Mishnah discussed, just to look at the Mishnah a little bit, just even though you did it already, but maybe just to start that Mishnah. What can you light and what can't you light, right? So then the Mishnah mentions all different types of items. And again, the issue is, what's the issue? The issue is, are we afraid you're going to come to play with it on Shabbat? Meaning, because now the normal wicks that we use, we know are good wicks. So therefore, you're not afraid they're going to come to. But the Mishnah talks about certain types of materials that were not such good wicks, and therefore there was concern that you might come to play with it on Shabbat. And what we're going to learn tomorrow, we're going to get into Hanukkah, because the Gemara is going to talk about the wicks that we can't use on a Friday, those wicks that are not good to be used on Friday, or the oils that we can't use on Friday. What about using them could they be used in the Beit HaMikdash? Can they be used on Shabbat? Can they be used for Hanukkah? Is there differences between the wicks and the oil of Hanukkah than the wicks and the oil of Shabbat? So we'll stay tuned. We'll see that tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. All the best. Take care, Ronnie.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you too. Take care, Ralph and Asaf and everybody.
Thank you. You too.